Let me, all right. Mm, yeah, here we go. I think we're live. Yeah. All right, let me just turn this down. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. So, Ghost Hunters radio show. We've been reviewing movies, and this has been like I don't know, its own consciousness within the consciousness of the original intention, I think. But it's part of it. So, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for coming in, Liara. And what are we going to get into today? Do you have a Zen story?
Well, I have a story, but it's not a Zen story. Um, as usual, it makes sense to share a story that sets the stage for the theme of our program. And we're focusing on this whole idea of timing and the expansion of human consciousness. And there are a series of events that have been unfolding and continue to unfold in our experience as a humanity. And so today's theme has to do with extraterrestrials. And the story I'm going to share with you has incredible synchronicity for me because I currently reside in Western Australia. And I moved here without necessarily knowing exactly why, but we continue to join dots as we go. And the story I'm going to share with you has to do with some rock paintings here in Western Australia. And the theme that will flow through our films today and our discussions is the principle of curiosity. Because as a humanity, we are curious about the unknown and we're propelled forward on our journey based on this. And here in Western Australia, there are some fascinating rock paintings. Over 4,000 years old is the estimation. And they're the art of an Aboriginal Wangina or Wangiri group. There are a few groups actually, but they are described as this. And these paintings are located in the Kimberley region, which is the northwestern area of Western Australia. And the paintings represent spirits that the ancestors came down from the sky, descended from the sky, and came up out of the water. And they handed down orally these stories over generations and generations. And what's really interesting is there are two aspects of the story that stand out. The aspects of the story that stand out are that the spirits that came down from the sky and up from the sea were they created the earth and all of the inhabitants while maintaining the fertility of the land. And they also maintained this a natural balance. And what's interesting is that there is this reverence that is shared by a number of Aboriginal communities or tribes or mobs that share in the belief in these sightings. And much like the Native American Indians of the United States or in Canada as well, there are many different groups and they have different languages, different experiences. But this is one very common thread that's shared amongst many different groups. And what's interesting is these paintings have been um, restored. Over 40 layers of paint is there. And this is part of how these people um, keep or continue sharing their stories. They reinforce this very strong belief in something beyond them. And I find that the paintings are especially interesting because they're red, black, and yellow. There's a white background. And these beings have no mouths. So there's this idea that these beings were so powerful, they didn't need to speak. And this is quite something because we see that in our culture in some of the beings that we see portrayed in films and texts. So I feel that bringing this up today is quite interesting and relevant. It's not a Zen story like we have been doing thus far, but it certainly does set the stage for something that has existed and influenced human culture for as long as we can remember. Have you ever heard of these paintings or these concepts, Todd?
Well, I haven't heard of the painting specifically, but I do understand the energy of what you're conveying. And I
Mhm.
think the first thing that really sticks out is the red, what is it? Red, black, and yellow. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, red, black,
So,
and yellow.
yeah. So if I look at the way things are happening right now, for each one of us on an individual basis as we show up into the next scene of our lives, which happens throughout the day. Um, for me, there's been a huge, not just a release, but a cleansing to the point that the channel's fully open from the root. And I think it's a very masculine thing. I don't know if I'm accurate about that, but for me, it feels that way. And so the red really speaks to me, and the yellow, which if you take the middle ground, is a sacral. And I had an experience 4 days, 3 days ago that was I thought I was going to die as everything shifted from my root to my sacral. But I do see this black, and the black is like the background. The black is like the if you I'm not an artist in that extent of like painting things, but my brother is, and I've been around other people, and they get these canvases, and the canvases are white, but it's almost like the canvas is black, and you
Mm,
create the colors from there, you know.
mm,
So that's the first thing that jumps out to me. And the other thing that does is the presence of an aspect, whether we see it outside of ourselves or within ourselves, that doesn't have lips that move, that carries some kind of traditional, ancient, Akashic, oral history type of coding that's still being passed down. For me, I feel like that happens a lot, um, or maybe even mostly through the eyes. And that's kind of how I see that language. That's kind of how I see this story is that there's, regardless of what's happened to whoever, you, me, whoever, whatever society, um, there's something, that common thread I think we talked about before, that continues to come through. Like it's not going anywhere. In fact, it's growing.
mm.
That's kind of what I got out of it.
Well, I'm glad to hear it resonates. I'm sure that it's one of those things that you can approach from many different angles. And what I find quite interesting and remarkable is that the story I share with you about the Aboriginal recollection of these beings coming from the sky and the sea is shared with reverence. It's shared with respect, and it's shared with a certain kind of frequency or vibration. Whereas the vast majority of films that I invite us to explore a bit today, mainly from the Western world, have a very different frequency associated with them. It's a fear-based frequency. And the first one I'm going to draw our attention to is Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is a film that came out in 1977. Do you remember that one, Todd?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. For some people, it's one that does stand out. Maybe if not the title, then the little jingle. Can you sing the little jingle that stands out from that movie?
What? Beep, 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 beep.
That's right, the five do 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 do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that movie has, I think, a lot of significance to our stories, the people like us, the weirdos. Um, the well, if you look at You look at the woman that was the lead character, the blonde that had the son that all that happened to. So you have this experience which makes no sense, which is beyond the world's pretenses and definitions and understandings. And then you have this dude, this little guy, Richard Dreyfuss, who builds a mountain in the middle of his den. So I can see two things there. I can see for all of us the the part of the experience is like, what the hell is going on here? Which is the woman, right? And that also carried by her presence, and that's her child, and so on. But then the masculine going, hey man, fuck this shit. I'm I'm gonna build this mountain in my lounge and I'm going to pursue this. So there's both elements, I think, in terms of this is what, 1977. So, and I know I'm speaking in metaphorical terms. So the obsession of staying with what you know is coming into yourself, and then the contrast being her, who is a omniscient being, even though maybe unconscious as we all are to a certain level, whatever, and dealing with that. Then you have the third element. And the third element is the ET. So, just real quick to conclude it. So, there's this thing Darwinism, creationism, we came from animals, blah, 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 whatever the narrative is. And there's another one. And the other one is we are self sourcing, we are self creating, we are coming into this higher awareness where we start to develop things in congruence with what we are in balance with, which is coming to a higher point and a newer point of creation because we're obtaining that awareness. Now, the ET part of it is this is us, this is our family. They're not our gods. They're facilitating, they're collaborating with us, and we are on point. So I see those two human characters and even the little boy as prime examples of the mother, the father, the golden child. I never thought that movie would come up in a ghost stories thing.
We're full of surprises, aren't we, Todd? Well, the idea of ghosts in the context of our show has sort of focused on fears, those things we're afraid of that we really ought to look at a little more closely to see from a different point of view so that we don't feel scared anymore. And that particular movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, brings up a number of themes, and you do a wonderful job of highlighting a number of them. Um, but it's sort of, you have different perspectives that we can see from where we are now in 2025 that differ from how things were viewed perhaps at our level of consciousness in 1977, because you did have the masculine and the feminine perspective that you highlight very well, and the child's perspective. But we don't look at things as superficially anymore. I sense we do make the connection you do, that we're guiding ourselves home. We're guiding ourselves to knowledge that we have within ourselves that we hadn't been able to access before. And in the movie, there is this idea that there's something outside of us, something we have reason to fear. And it takes shape as it does. But there are also aspects or elements of the movie that are heartwarming, that are reassuring. And why is it that we remember that jingle this many years later? The tone of the movie. There's something deeper that is a frequency that we have within us that we can access. And it's not simply the idea of that yearning to connect with the unknown or something beyond our sense of humanity, what we've been taught to view as humanity. But it's also a divine connection, a sense of wholeness, a sense that there is a part of us that has always been here, but we haven't been ready to see it. And it takes different forms. And so when we review a film like this, there are aspects that cause our heart to get warmer, our eyes to lighten up, not out of fear, but out of a sensation we're just starting to reacquaint ourselves with. And that's really what I want to draw attention to, more so than the fear-based narrative that continues, and you'll be able to follow it through other films that we look at today. But I feel it's important to highlight what we're able to see now through the eyes of experience, through the eyes of expanding consciousness that we weren't able to see originally. Can you see a difference, Todd?
Well, yeah. I think what happens with both those characters, they're both driven from a different, a seemingly different influence or force of the universal energy. Let's say that one of them is driven by fear. I'm not a woman, and I've always understood, that their journey is different. Like in my marriages and my children being born, I'm like, oh my God, you're carrying a universe in your stomach. Like, what the hell? We're not the same creature. So and I can't, so what I'm saying is, I can't relate to that occurrence in that movie where her little boy gets taken and she's somehow or another telepathically in tune with, like she's in the synchronicity and she's driven towards this place at the end of the movie to reunite or whatever. And then you have the other side, which is like, this lightning bolt out of nowhere. I'm driving down the road and all of a sudden my truck starts shaking and the lights go on and and I've got a beautiful wife at home and children, but I don't give a fuck because I'm not going to care about my job. I'm just going to build this mountain of mud in my den. So you see both of them. Now going back to what you're saying. Yeah. What is the element that's driven those two, in this case, those two souls or people or whatever to this place with the others that were there? Um, but at the same time, as the two characters basically dive into their soul, not only with themselves, with each other, even though they're not
Mhm.
romantically involved, but they have this connection.
Mhm.
And then the golden child's the golden child. But my point is that that's what's driving it. And then you have this external element, which you might call the government
Mhm.
or the ETs or both, right? But the bottom line is that the omniscience, the omnipotence, the creativity, the root, everything is in that basic thread. You know, whether somebody wants to argue whether we descended from animal or ascended from animals and evolved from animals, or we were genetically modified or whatever the case is, that we're talking spirit, we're talking energy, we're talking soul. And I've always felt like that the galactic aspects of ourselves are the closest things to us. So
Mhm.
thereby they would be those that would facilitate us. And I feel like that's where the relevance of what you're bringing up to start the show is, because I feel like that's where we're at. It's almost like the non-physical meets the physical, or
Yes.
the hidden esoteric from those that think they know better than us and we can't handle the truth, kind of thing, kind of meets the fact that you can't hide anything anymore. No more ghost.
Yes. I love that point that you make, and making the reference to the Aboriginal paintings and the reverence that we have for something beyond us. That inversion, that shift, is something that's happening and has happened for some and is in the process of happening for others. And that enables us to see things from a different point of view. And it also helps lift us out of um, the assumption for some that the the scariest thing or the greatest ghost that we have isn't the prospect of things like natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, or overpopulation, whole reversal, or some of these disasters that we've seen in movies, but it's actually related to something unseen that we're just in the process of unveiling for ourselves. And as we unveil that, then that's pulling the carpet out from under the ghost, if the ghost had any feet to put on it in the first place.
So well, this is kind of a good metaphor, all right, or analogy. So imagine any one of us, we're pulled out onto the carpet. We're in that void. We're standing there.
Mm,
All the lights are on us. And in front of us is anything and everything. It could be the mother goddess. It could be the darkest demon. It could be, and at some point, uh, I think what's happening is we're being driven to the awareness that it is me, that anything that's presenting itself to me
mm,
and now the reason I bring this up is because I think we're tying this up in the collective, in the physicality. So the introduction or the affirmation of ET and other sentient life of high sensitivity and high intelligence, higher intelligence even, whatever, is coming into the fold. And so what are we going to do? After all this time, are we going to just go, wow, that just was a weird thing? Because if you go back to that movie, Richard Dreyfuss, his boss came and this person came and his wife said, I'm leaving and, whatever. No, I'm building this thing. What was he building? He was building his own bridge based on the foundation of what he innately knew couldn't be wrong or was the truth. And she was doing the
mm,
same thing. So,
mm,
I feel like that's what's happening, and maybe there's controllers in this world that have been around a long time, and we can't let them know because they can't handle it. Is bullshit. It's been about hoarding power, hoarding energy, trying to hold on to something in a universal energy that is runs through us all that you can't put into a suspended animation very long or a stagnation. So, you know, again, if you look at the end of that movie, if you look at it energetically and get off the human storyline and the sensationalism, you have this dude. He's only one example, but you have this dude who says, "Give me a suit. I'm going on the ship."
mm. I love that.
You know what I mean? And he's got a family. He's got a beautiful wife that he loves dearly, and he's got children. But he's like, yeah, it's an all or nothing proposition. We either, for the lack of a better word, buy into what we are, and all that includes, because the more that we accept within ourselves, the more that we're going to see out here. And now we're doing it together. So I feel like that the ET connection uh, is a very important connection
Mm,
because it represents both. It represents this thing I can't understand that I have to go into dimension or go into meditation or session or out of body experience to interact with. And then you have the physical, and they're like coming together now. And so there's a lot of stuff being fleshed out right now.
mm. Certainly is. And originally, many people viewed um, one of those protagonists as being on a kind of biblical journey like Moses. They sort of looked at it as kind of a religious pilgrimage to connect with something beyond them. Um, because we have this human divine connection, but we're in the process of redefining and rescripting what that means and doing it without fear. So it's wonderful to be able to revisit a film like that and see it from a much more informed point of view, and to recognize that the unseen worlds, those things that haven't always been in our scope of awareness, don't have to elicit fear. They can actually elicit joy and reverence and love. And by way of shifting that vibration and grounding that, that takes away any power that can be exerted over us through fear. And this makes a great stepping stone to move into a few other films that are also related to alien abductions. I just find that the synchronicity of these suggestions is quite extraordinary. Are you familiar with Communion? There was a book, Whitley Strieber.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with him. In fact, I was like tapped into him like 2 nights ago. I don't mean like, like having a aspect come in, but there was like a conversation happening. Yeah, I followed him for 20 years. I've probably seen, 15 podcasts that he's done. It's interesting.
Mhm.
Very, very, very powerful stuff.
It is very powerful. I would resonate with that. It's interesting that years ago, my dad never had a son. So I was the daughter who ended up doing all the sci-fi stuff with him. And I was introduced to all these things from a very young age and resonated very deeply. Whitley Strieber's book was one of my first books early on. And his story of abduction and how that was made into a film with Christopher Walken was quite powerful for me. Um, but when we are presented with spiritual visitations in popular culture, so often we are presented with the idea of trauma and existential crisis related to these kinds of things. And that's not to say these kinds of experiences aren't real for those who experience them, but generally they are presented in this sci-fi horror genre, which tends to evoke similar heavy emotions in viewers. And it also brings up the possibility of something called implants and holographic programming, which some of our viewers and listeners may be familiar with. And so it's important to recognize that experiences that we have ourselves can be viewed as very real, but we also are wise to be aware of the possibility that there are experiences that are shared that may also be influenced by things beyond them. Does that resonate, or do you have any comments to make on that topic? I don't hear you, Todd.
No, I said absolutely, absolutely. There's so much to be said for this. Sorry about that.
Mhm.
I muted. No, because look, like I saw Whitney on Danny Jones podcast probably a year ago, year and a half ago, and he talked about an implant from the Arcturians being put in his ear, and he even had
Mhm.
a CAT scan showing it. Right. Uh, I know of another experience he had that where basically an ET aspect, feminine, made love to him. Right. Now, through my work, I've come across people that have had both of these same experiences,
Mhm.
and so it takes me back to a conversation I had. I used to do a lot of shows with. I should look her up, but I probably did 20 shows with Mary Rodwell, your country
Yes.
mate. Okay.
Mhm.
So without going into all her credibility and everything, I'm not even going to go there. But through, because she's been tapped in producing or at least sharing this material since the mid 90s.
Exactly.
So about 4 or 5 years ago, I'm having a show with her, and she's telling me a couple of things. First thing she's telling me is that this is like probably early COVID. And she's saying there's this group of professionals, like scientists, doctors, lawyers that are kind of meeting that she was involved with that don't want it public because they can't afford to, right? And
Of
so
course.
she was talking about that. And she was talking about how the consciousness is, yeah, I guess, embodying, and where's the proof kind of thing. We were talking about, yeah, at the human level though, yeah, that all sounds great, but what's really happening? So she's tapped in. And so she ends up telling me this story about where, and I don't remember what her involvement was, but the information was spot on. And there was a university that did a study, and I think it was Australian, and they studied people that had been abducted from their experience and from their retelling,
Hmm.
and also studied people that had shamanic experiences.
Yep.
Okay. So be it through ayahuasca or through whatever, right? And so at the end of the research and everything, the product was the same. That an alien abduction was characteristic and symptomatic of the same things, both in terms of the experience and what happened with the individual. They were the same, you know? I mean, I'm in Mexico, and it's interesting because, and there's a point to this. I'm watching these riots and these revolutionary type of rhythms, what they call it, a color revolution and this and that. And I don't doubt that. There's the mix of polarities everywhere. The cartel, all these other things. But when you're standing on the other side and you're looking at it and going, okay, where is all this? you know, so there's a lot of what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of um, propaganda, and that's a word for it. You could say external suggestions or whatever the case is. It's still driving us down to ourselves. So what I'm trying to say is the reason I brought that up is because those people that have had, and I haven't, I've had out of bodies, but I've never had a visitation to that degree that my friends and people I've talked to have, where, little people come in, you walk through the wall, you go into a spaceship, and then you're on a stainless steel table and they're probing you. But the rea- but what part of the consciousness or subconsciousness or superconsciousness is telling that story? Is it trauma related? Or is it something? Look, I do know this, even though I haven't had those types of experiences, I know, especially in the last couple, 2, 3 months, I've been pulled up on the ship and retooled many times. Like they're fixing me so I can keep going, kind of thing. Which, back to that study that Mary talked about, it's a shamanic experience. Well, what is light? It's a shamanic experience. It's where
Hmm.
you gain from what you experience and what you know, and you can only know by what you have experienced. And again, we order these things. So that's a great first two movies. In fact, I find Whitney his stuff to be as credible as anything out there because re- regardless of the possibilities of MK Ultra or mind programming or possession or BS or propaganda, you can feel the human element, even in that movie they made with Christopher Walken, even way back then, because back then that was like, what the hell is this? I mean, E.T. was one thing, but this movie was like, whoa, is this a horror movie or is this like a inspirational movie?
That's it, like a childhood encounter with a friendly alien versus sex with aliens are two very different things. And we look at every experience that enters our scope of awareness with a grain of salt. And you might say, there is skepticism that exists for many, but I love the analogy you make with the shamanic journey. I resonate wholeheartedly with that because a shamanic journey relates to different levels of expanding consciousness. You begin with the sense of the experience of, you could say, a worm crawling on the ground. And as you expand consciousness, then you might become a two-legged creature or four-legged creature, then a two-legged creature, maybe a fish, then a bird. You know, you're progressively expanding your point of view until you become, you know, the earth, or you become the cosmos, and you can see everything from an expanded perspective that gives you empathy and understanding and access to the universal principles that allow you to experience everything from all of these perspectives. And you no longer judge or fear any of them because you see that your core essence is in everything. And that includes those things that you might fear at different stages of consciousness. But as you come to see that they are part of you, then you integrate them and you see them very differently. And I agree with you. These first two films are quite profound, and they're a great stepping stone to the next one, which happens to be the Alpha Code from 2020. Are you familiar with that one?
No, not at all.
Well, this is an American Czechoslovakian collaboration. It's a sci-fi thriller, but it has to do with human alien hybrids. Um, and the idea, it's based on real life events again, based on abduction, but the procreation uh, that ensues, and you know, government involvement and other elements which make the scenes quite dramatic. But again, it sort of draws the viewer into the idea of a horrific, scary scenario where we have everything to fear because of these things that are going on that we cannot control. And if you step outside of that, you can also see it from a completely different perspective where you're offered gifts of remembering and you're able to join dots about other things. What stands out for you in that concept, even if you haven't seen it?
Well, I think it ties into the others. And I think what happens is that, you can look at these movies or read a book or dive into a character or whatever the case is. But what ultimately is the story? It's, as they say, as Joseph Campbell says, it's the hero's journey. So the only perspective that's going to remain is the one from behind my eyes here, right? So if I go back to something earlier, and even what you're talking about now, okay, so it's one thing to be in a state of consciousness where you are, I don't want to say at mercy, but at mercy of having being created by something different than you. I don't know much of the Bible, but I love that phrase, made in the image. So when I listen to these first three movies, what it really comes down to is, look, I am every mineral. I know I've been mountains. I've been the ocean. I'm the animals. I'm the elementals. I'm also angelic, etc. But there's this thing in terms of the galactic, you might say, that narrative. Okay, be it secret space program, be it galactic, galactic federation, or whatever. Um, that still doesn't feel right
Mm,
because it feels like it's telling me I'm different than you. I know better than you. And so ultimately, like with this Alpha Code, with the other two movies, the individual, it's Whitney's story is about him. That's the code. That's who
yes.
we are. So, in other words, there's some things that we might see lower than us. Oh, we have dominion over the earth. Well, I have a feeling that the plants and the pets and the animals are smarter than we are. They're waiting on us. And then you have the other side, which is this mystical, paranormal, ET-ish kind of thing. And you're like, oh, well, they've got to be. No, we're still the center of the universe here. We're the center of the story. We're the main character. And these movies and these stories that bring in the broadest expanse of the polarities, the things we don't want to even look at, are the things that bring us to ourselves the most. So bring it on, you know.
Mm.
We should all have these experiences, and I believe we have been, and I think it's going to come into more of a common acknowledgement. That's part of
I
the
sense we're
evolution.
certainly on the way there.
Yeah, it's like, at that point you go, okay, well then that cleans the slate with all that stuff because it don't even matter. All that stuff over there doesn't even matter. Oh yeah, we've all been connected to this and we're all in the same game. We've all been subjected to the same thing and all this stuff that so many people don't talk about. They really
Mm.
don't because if you look at film, those things that have been put forth have been in more of the horror category when the reality is this is reality. And so I think the last thing I would say too is the way this stuff is possibly, weaponized or potentialized in the sense of trying to keep us from looking the last place that we ever looked, which is where we've been looking the last few years. And let's keep going with it. And that is that, yeah, you can bring all this stuff to me that you want, but nothing's out to get me. Nothing's out to, be superior over me unless I allow it to. The whole point is to find our strength and our power and our truth. And so, yeah, I really feel like these types of movies that so far these first three have are taking us to that point. And the other thing is they have kind of a cutting edge uh, persona to them, ET, high tech, that type of thing, which makes sense because we've worn everything else out. So we might as well go down this road too.
So very true. And something worth highlighting in all of them is this whole concept of running away from something. Uh, Alpha Code highlights that as well. There's this woman with no identity, and she is running from, government, running from all these different things. And you have people running from things in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and of course in Communion as well. And ultimately, we cannot run from ourselves forever. And so there are these elements that are presenting that evoke fear or elicit fear because they're relegated to the horror genre. They're relegated to the taboo categories, those things we're not meant to talk about. But it is those very things that are actually coming to the surface of conscious awareness, which echoes our readiness to face those things that are starting to be magnified in our experience. And I guess that's from my own experience why things do get magnified because they want your attention. If you ever have a nightmare that recurs, or the monster in your story seems to get bigger, it wants to get your attention. It knows you're ready for that. It knows you're ready to see beneath the mask. You're ready to see deeper into yourself to better understand why you have been running from something for so long. And once you realize why you've been running, it loses its power over you. And you move on to the next thing and you become stronger, more ready to face whatever presents.
Yeah, because it was you the whole time. It was your determination that they had some kind of thing over you. I mean, it's an all or nothing proposition, and I love the whole idea and the concept of the hero's journey. I feel like almost anything you can read or watch, it's in there. But I don't think it ends with the resurrection of the fool, um, or the redemption. I don't feel like that's where it ends. And what I feel like that these three examples point to, it's what happens when you come out on the other side. So if you're Richard Dreyfuss, give me a spacesuit. I'm going to the ET spaceship, and I might be dinner tonight, but I might also get into something totally different. You know,
Mm, and I'm
if
ready
you
for it.
right, I mean, so it's not about it's not just like to me this period of evolution has been about two things. One is I'm awake. Oh, I'm aware. Oh yeah, 9/11 was bullshit. And you know what? They're gaslighting us and blah blah blah. Okay, but yeah. Well, let's go deeper than that. That noise is still there, right?
Mm,
Um, the second part is what am I going to do with it in form? Which means, first and foremost, that it has to be my form. I can't stand out here and live vicariously through a bunch of people and let them be crash dummies, crash test dummies, right? No, I'm going to enter that spaceship. I'm going to, like we talked about Interstellar last week. This hero, this fool slash hero, goes through this whole journey, and at the end, when everything's copacetic, he says, "I'm going to steal a spaceship and go find this potential love of my lives."
mm,
So, to me, that's what's happening here. I love the this whole thing that we've dove into the last few weeks because part of it's showing me the value of that in your face ghost. Like, oh, you don't want to look at this? Well, look at it. I'm going to
that's
have
right.
power over you. I'm going to, put shackles on your ankles, and yeah. Are you? And this is about our self awareness. And I guess what I'm saying is in relation, and analogous to the hero's journey is we're figuring out who we are, but that's not the end of the game. The end of the game or the beginning is what are we going to do with it,
That's right.
right?
What do we do with
And
the insight?
and you don't do that through walking on eggshells and and like not and beating around the bush. We're moving in further and further into a direct communicative paradigm that originates and initiates from ourselves with ourselves. And these ghosts and these ETs and these stories and these potential, horrific films or whatever, they're they're a great catalyst. They're really the extremes of the spectrum are the greatest catalysts. And we've all lived this. We've all lived this. We all had our dark nights of the soul.
Mm.
And hopefully, ease and grace, we won't have any more.
I love the word you used, catalyst or catapult, that is sending us into the next dimension, the next trajectory. And it's relevant that about, what, 8 or 9 months ago, the director of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, um, our friend Steven Spielberg, who also directed E.T. in 1982, had this interview. And he was talking to Drew Barrymore as part of it. And he said that he had decided long ago that he wasn't going to make a sequel to E.T. A lot of people wondered, when's the sequel? Because it was such a popular film, 300 million views or something. So he really tapped into the pulse of humanity in a similar way to what is happening with James Cameron and Avatar. But we won't get into that today. We'll pick that up maybe next week. But what's interesting about what Spielberg said was that if he had considered making a sequel to E.T., he would have made a sequel that would have involved E.T.'s home planet and going there. And there was a book called Green Planet that he had looked at as a possibility, and then he changed his mind. But ultimately, one of the messages we can get from that is that the next step of our evolution is not going to come from a movie. It's not going to come from someone else's idea of what we ought to do next. This is a stage in our evolution where we are deepening our awareness to the point where we can see into the state of what is possible, and we are going to create that for ourselves. So I found that quite an interesting point to make after having gone through only 3 of the movies I had on the list today, but there's always more material.
There's no rush. No, that's
That's
pretty
it.
profound. No, that's actually it's really speaking to the same thing we were talking about with the first three movies. because it's the how do you explain this? We're in this transition from a majority dominant human slash ego slash linear kind of perspective that we start to get these tidbits in that, oh, you're this and you're that and blah 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 and all this, and so this thing is happening. But we've been so conditioned to get to a point where, okay, now I understand everything. This is how it all works. Okay, I'm just going to sit here in my chair, put my feet on the table, and no, that's not how it works.
Now watch the
That's
next
not how
movie.
it works. No. So it takes this next step, and I feel like that's what this is speaking to. The step is Richard Dreyfuss building a mountain of mud in his den or boarding that ship at the end. The step is Matthew McConaughey saying, fuck it, I'm going. I mean, his chances are like 1 out of 1 million. He's already went through a black hole. You know what I mean? So, who knows? You might get there and she's 199 years old and he's, 17. Who knows? But it takes stepping into spaces that are undefined, unknown. And here's the thing. There is unknown and undefined to those things that we see outside of ourselves that may be part of that landscape as they are to us. And the only way to break through into new code and new creation and new universal energies is to step into that unknown. And I feel like that there is a significance to the theme of these shows the last few weeks and even the way they've evolved because it started with Ghost, right? And then it's kind of evolved and like, oh, this movie and that movie and and now we're in the ET range, you know? I mean, it's still a reflection of us. It's still inviting us. It's not threatening us. The only thing that's threatening us, and whether that's in our heads or not, which it probably is you better stay right here. Don't move. Don't move out of this box. Don't move past these limitations or boundaries. And I think what's happening is from a soul level, being embodied, we're saying, fuck this. We're walking through this gate. We're walking through this wall. We're stepping forward. We don't know what it's going to be. We don't. It requires a tremendous amount of humility and transparency. And obviously, love, pure intention, integrity, these things that are the virtue of the soul. But to think that the ghost and the ETs and those scary things could drive us to this as the greatest catalyst, yeah, we wouldn't have thought that. We didn't even want to look at this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15. I still get nightmares about The Exorcist, which I went to see at 9 years old. But but I also see the value because because I think I told you this before, but when I was in junior high, I used to sleep with the radio on. And it was around the time I'd seen The Exorcist a couple years earlier, and they had a song, and it was called Tubular Bells. And it was the theme song of The Exorcist. So it was kind of like hearing the movie from Jaws, if you're scared of sharks. Dun, 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 dun. So at night, I'd be listening and jamming and hearing Motown and hearing this, and all of a sudden, this Tubular Bells would come on, and it'd be 10:30 at night. I'm 13 years old. I'm laying in my bed, going, "Oh shit!" and this, but it was like this initiation. I went on for maybe a year. I don't know, and I would hear it. It was a popular tune. I would hear it almost every night, and every night I got a little further down the road. I got a little further past the apparent hold or power that this element had on me. Now, what's the difference between that and anything else outside of you? Nothing.
Nothing.
Exactly. So bring on the
Mm.
ghost. You know, let's just defer the Exorcist part. That'd be the last movie we want to talk about.
We won't look at that one quite yet.
It's actually quite comical when you look back at it.
Yes. but we will get to it. It's on the list.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. But what's the difference between that? I do a lot of research, and I've done some research with exorcisms, people talking about levitation, talking about just different things. I've had my own experiences with that type of energy. But what's the difference between that and three small beings walking into your room and taking you into a spaceship? Or the very human traumas that we've been through, and they're numerous.
Hmm,
What's the difference? At the end of the day, we're still here. And, we can stay here and we can live with these dynamics and say, okay, this is how it's all set up, and I'm going to be in this room or this box. Or we can say, fuck it, I'm opening that door and I'm going to go see what else is there. Like Richard
hmm.
Dreyfuss did at the end of that movie, which was because in that movie his wife was Terry Garr,
That's right.
and right, and you could tell they were in love. Like she knew he was batshit crazy, but she
Didn't
still
change
loved
anything.
him, right? She still loved him. As she's pulling out of the driveway and he's throwing in plants that he's pulled out of the garden into the kitchen sink, so he can continue to build his mountain in the den. But that's the thing, like you know, I believe in energy and the purity of its intent and the purity of its beingness. So, did he lose her? I don't think so. In my version of the story, which is not just a human guy getting on a spaceship, it's energy. They're still
That's right.
there. They're still wrapped together. It's all there. You don't lose anything, which is crazy because people are always talking about you got to detach from this and detach from that. I'm like, how can you detach from anything that you're always connected to?
Hmm. It makes so much sense what you're saying. It resonates in the heart, and it sort of is a wonderful reminder in light of what could be on the horizon and what has been on the horizon. If you look at, the Atlas passing by, or you look at the prospect of what people talk about could be landings of spaceships at some stage, to see how humanity will respond. Ultimately, if we see everything as a possible implant into our holographic reality, it's a test for our own emotional stability or our own energetic frequency. What is it that we can handle? And when we start to see that everything is energy and we neutralize the charge, then it doesn't have a hold on us anymore. And we don't respond, well, react in fear. We respond um, from a grounded, neutral position, where we know that we love and accept ourselves fully. So anything that is presented to us is simply a reflection of that. And that's what, some people will even say the passing atlas could be viewed as a probe, a test, similar to COVID or other examples of scare tactics that have been put out into the public spheres to see how
Yeah.
people will respond, right? And there are always going to be people who have a certain fear-based response. But as you begin to see through these things or see the common thread, different levels of tests that you're giving yourself to remind yourself of your own hidden genius, then it has a different impact on you. And you can find the humor in it. You can find the wisdom in it. And that's why we're here on this show, to invite you to reflect on your life differently and to see that you are a powerful, sovereign being and that you can handle anything that presents and that you are amazing. That's why we're here, just to echo that.
Yeah. Here. Yeah. And yeah, I love what you said about the, making the connection between like COVID and Atlas 3i Atlas, whatever it is. Um, it's all the power of suggestion. This last few weeks, we've talked about movies, but it's all a fucking movie. Okay. A movie's presenting something to you. That's what it's doing. And, I've heard 40 different narratives about this 3i Atlas. There's
Mm,
4 million Anunnakis in stasis, and they're going to land and take over the world too. It's been a look. I love my friend Raylene Brady. She said they're all true. Every one of them's true.
yeah.
And that's true. That's the field. The field is everybody's perception. And look, all you have to do to validate your own existence now is go on the internet, because all you have to do is go down news feeds on Facebook, X, or whatever the case is, YouTube, and you'll find whatever you want to validate and substantiate yourself. That's a form of stagnation. And so what you're bringing up here at the end, it doesn't matter if it's Spielberg's E.T. or Star Wars or Exorcist or whatever, the whole litany. I mean, because what remains? You're the one that bought the ticket, went into the theater, got the popcorn and the hot dog and the Coke,
And
watched the
directed the
movie.
movie.
Yes, and you're the one that walks out. So you walk in to the experience in a not limited, but into your present state of consciousness. From your present state of consciousness, you have this experience, which is just like Earth, because everything that we had coming into the situation, we have leaving. What we don't have is the experience in between, and that's what the movie is. And I feel like that what's coming out of this series is that we have set up cookie crumbs, obviously, synchronicities and all that stuff, 1111. But we've also set up uh, in the machine the device of getting in our face and pushing us a little bit further every time. Are you sure? Are you sure? Do you really
Mhm.
believe that? Do you really believe that? Like, until you get to the point where you're just like, I don't know what the hell I believe. But I'm the one. I'm still here. I was here going into the movie. I'm here when I'm leaving, and it doesn't matter what the superficial. Is it a ghost? Is it an ET? Is it a this? Is it that? It's it's a grand design bringing us back to ourselves, and it's a very important time because I think the movie is essentially taking on certain characteristics of futuristic, of high technology, of hidden secrets coming out, of whatever, almost like a multi-stream, multi-dimensionality in form. And yet we will still be here. We were, we are, and we will be, like the eye of the hurricane. And this is, I feel like, what we're discovering. And then, like I said, the second half being, now what am I going to do with it? Because the only time you can do anything with it is right now. You can't wait till you figure everything out. You can't wait till everything's perfect. Oh, well, let Three Eye Atlas show its hand, and let Project Blue Beam happen, or this happen. No, the 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 path, the door is always there, and I really feel like um, creativity is the root of it, or sacred sexuality, or however you want to put it. And that's a whole game changer, because all these stories and all these movies, they're like the minor league. We're going to break through, and there's going to be a whole new set of movies, and the whole journey starts again, you know?
Mm. I love how we have covered such interesting topics. It's always thought-provoking and exciting because I never know exactly which direction we will go. But as always, thanking all of our listeners and viewers for being here, for sharing their input, feedback, and suggestions, because that's part of why this program evolves as it does. So, again, we look forward to reconnecting before you know it, and keep adventuring because we are our divine purpose and we decide which directions it will unfold.
Yeah. Here, here. Touche. I'll see you next week, and I will reach out to you the next day or two on the emails, the messages. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care. Thank you, everybody, for coming in. And thank you for the love and support and contributions. Let us keep doing this every day. And thank you, Liara. And I'll see you next week.
Until we connect again.